in the heart of a lonely valley, nestled deep within the vastness of the Old West, young Miriam tended to her small garden, the setting sun casting long shadows over the quiet village. The soft murmurs of wind through the sagebrush carried a deceptive peace, a fragile calm that cloaked the nights here. Calm soon to shatter like glass under a violent storm. Her world, small and serene, teetered on the edge of darkness. The village of Ponderosa's End lay isolated between endless plains and rugged hills, a scattering of dusty wooden cabins surrounded by weathered fences. Its simple structures bore the marks of time and hardship, but the warmth of close community lingered in the smoke curling from chimneys and the faint laughter that drifted down the dirt paths at dusk. Here, life moved slowly, tied to the rhythm of sun, every face familiar, and every moment hard-won, yet unbearably vulnerable in this wild frontier. Miriam was barely 17, a slim figure of youth and determination, whose laughter had long been the village's quiet song. Raised among these humble souls, she carried an innocence woven tightly with the land's quiet strength. She moved through the village with gentle hands and hopeful eyes, her spirit a delicate balance between the yearning for something beyond and the deep roots anchoring her to Ponderosa's End. As she knelt beside the soil, the early breeze whispered promises of calm nights ahead, unknowing of the dread soon to come. Without warning, the stillness shattered like thunder. Torches flickered into sight, blazing through the trees as cries tore through the night air. A fierce war party, faces painted with rage and purpose, descended upon the village, leaving no time for prayer or flight. In a blur of chaos and firelight, Miriam's heart thudded fiercely against her ribs as hands seized her, pulling her from the only world she had ever known. The scent of smoke and fear drenched the cold night. Familiar voices turned to screams, swallowed by the dark. In that instant, she became a captive of forces that neither the village nor her youth could withstand. Terror sprang from every heartbeat, entwining with a profound loneliness she had never imagined possible. Dragged beyond the fragile safety of her home, Miriam's eyes searched the unfamiliar faces of her captors, wide with horror and disbelief. Every step took her deeper into foreign shadows, where promises dissolved into silence. Her skin prickled with the harsh bite of the cool night air, and the rough grip of a destiny she never chose. In this hostile land, the girl who once dreamed, beneath open skies, now trembled amid whispers of chains and longing for the sunlit places left behind. In the midst of the camp, a towering figure emerged, a warrior named Kalen. His presence was a storm held in check, powerful, resolute, and marked by an ancient honor that shone through his battle-worn silence. Eyes sharp as eagles, he moved among the warriors with a quiet grace, sensing the burden of the girl cloaked in fear. Though bound within enemy lines, Miriam's spirit flickered unevenly, casting fragile shadows of hope stirred by the respectful stance of Kalen, known among his people as a guardian of courage and truth. A fierce struggle clawed inside Kalen's chest as he watched the captive girl, the daughter of a land he revered, taken by those driven by vengeance. The weight of choice pressed heavy, to confront the forces that threatened both his tribe and this fragile soul, tethered to a distant home. Reckless though it seemed, Kalen seized a silent resolve in the night. Alone, he would cross the burning lands and face the fortresses that held Miriam captive, risking honor, trust, and his very life to bring her back. The knowledge of sacrifice settled like iron in his veins. As the firelight flickered against the ashen sky, Kalen turned away from the hostile camp. His figure slipped into the shadows of the wilderness, heart pounding with the cruel certainty of the path he embraced, a path laced with peril and impossible hope. The silence after his departure was a calm, uneasy, pregnant with the weight of actions yet to come. Muitos compañeros de jornada que acompañan nossas lendas por estas terras esquecidas nos contaram que o destino, o algoritmo traiçoeiro do YouTube, às vezes desfaz suas inscrições sem aviso, antes que a próxima trilha perigosa se revele e uma nova reviravolta aconteça. Dê uma espiada rápida aí embaixo do vídeo e garanta que você ainda está inscrito em nosso bando, para não perder o fio da meada. Não queremos que você perca nenhuma das vozes que ecoam deste vale. Verifique sua inscrição agora e junte-se à nossa saga. Night had fallen like a heavy velvet curtain as Kalen moved through the dense thickets beyond the enemy encampment. His breath a steady rhythm in the cool air. The faint crackle of distant fires still echoed behind him. But where others might have stumbled and looked back in fear, Kalen's gaze remained fixed ahead. Clasped tightly beneath his arm was Miriam, fragile yet alive, wrapped in the worn threads of a once-stolen shawl, now his shield. Every step forward was a gamble, a whispered prayer to the land that had raised him, a vow to the warrior spirit guiding his hand. His eyes, steely and sharp, darted through the shadows, alert for the telltale rustle or snapped twig betraying the enemy's pursuit. The fragile thread of freedom they clutched was all that separated them from the merciless wilderness that threatened more than just their bodies. Miriam's wrists, bound but loosened, ached against the rough leather. Her breaths were shallow, the weight of exhaustion pressing deep into the curve of her ribs. Her eyes, dark pools swirling with fear and disbelief, met Kalen's in fleeting moments. Questions locked inside, silent yet raw. Distrust knotted between them like a stubborn tangle of thornbrush. She had been raised among settlers. He was the embodiment of a culture she was taught to fear. To Miriam, Kalen was both her rescuer and the unknown shadow she dared not fully trust. "Where are we going?" she whispered once, voice hoarse but sharp. Kalen paused beneath the heavy boughs, the faint glimmer of moonlight tracing the worn lines of his face. A warrior's face, hardened by battle, yet softened in these moments by a quiet resolve. "Away from this place, to where you can be safe." Miriam's lip trembled. "How do I know you won't bring me back? Or worse?" A tightening ache settled in Kalen's chest. It was not lost on him, the weight of the world Miriam carried, one born from years of stories spun with fear, pain painted across every face he represented. "I do not fight my own kind," he said softly, choosing his words like arrows, aimed to pierce doubt. "I fight for life, for hope." But hope was a fragile thing. Tales of Apaches and settlers were woven with blood and suspicion, and no single promise could undo what had seeped so deep. Miriam shifted away, clutching her tattered skirts, unyielding as the dry earth beneath their feet. The night stretched long, filled only by the muffled sounds of their steps and the distant calls of unseen creatures. Kaelin walked with measured patience, knowing trust was not a gift freely given. It was earned, drop by drop, through wordless choices and small acts of courage. The terrain changed as they circled the ridge, the thick woods thinning to a sparse thicket that opened onto a barren expanse. Here, the land seemed to hold its breath, parched, hostile, and wide. They moved cautiously, Miriam limping slightly from the toll of her captivity, Kaelin matching his stride carefully. Suddenly, a snap, sharp and unnatural, cut through the stillness. Kaelin froze, muscles coiled. Miriam's heart thundered in her chest as her eyes darted wildly. The shadows, now thick with menace. "They're close," Kaelin murmured, his hand brushing roughly against the bow slung across his back. From the ridge behind, faint footsteps broke the silence. A low murmur carried on the wind, warned of a hunting party closing in on the stolen prize they sought so fiercely. Time no longer belonged to them. It twisted and snapped, like dry twigs beneath their feet. "Hide," Kaelin urged urgently, pulling Miriam into the scant cover of a withered sagebrush. Her breath caught as she pressed against the earth, her thoughts a storm of desperation and newfound reliance on the very man who had shattered her world. Kaelin's eyes burned into the night, scanning with fierce intent, searching for weakness in the encroaching shadows. The enemy's voices came closer, cruel whispers promising capture, retribution for the stolen girl. Miriam's fingers grasped Kaelin's sleeve, a silent plea woven from fear and fragile hope. He met her gaze, silent reassurance passing between them like a fragile flame, stubbornly alive. The voices grew louder, steps pounding nearer, the web tightening. Kaelin's muscles tensed, decisions crashing like thunder behind his steady gaze. To stand and fight was certain death, flight without caution, a swift capture. He weighed options born of hard years, lore of the land, and the unforgiving code of survival. With a swift motion, he slipped back into the shadows, returning moments later with a coiled length of rawhide. Miriam watched, confusion and curiosity mingling with dread. "This," Kaelin said quietly, "is your shield now. Trust it as you must trust me." Their escape through the wilderness had only just begun. The fragile alliance hung on splinters of trust, built in small acts, a crushed sparrow in the palm, a steady heartbeat shared in the chill air. The enemies. Patrol parted the trees, their voices slicing through the night, determined and cold. Kaelin and Miriam pressed close, breath held tight, souls tethered in the quiet war waged between predator and prey. Then the crack of a twig betrayed their spot. Without hesitation, Kaelin stepped forward, voice low but commanding, away from her. The attackers turned, snarls blooming in the dark. The inevitable fight surged, blade clashing against blade. Raw survival laid bare under a blanket of stars. The skirmish was brief but brutal, each moment a razor's edge. Kalen's strikes were precise, powerful, a dancer weaving death with honor. Miriam, though trembling with fear, drew on a wellspring she had not known, clutching her rawhide shield, ready to stand beside her savior. As the last foe fell back, broken and defeated, the pair found themselves breathless and surrounded by silence once again. But their trials were far from over. Kalen knelt beside Miriam, voice soft as the wind's murmur. "We cannot stay. Night will bring more. We must move together." Miriam nodded, the fierce ember of trust sparking in her gaze, despite the shadows that gripped her heart. They slipped away into the dense brush, footsteps swallowed by the world. But soon the cold dawn would bring new dangers, the footfalls of a relentless patrol edging closer to their fragile sanctuary. The creeping threat loomed like a storm on the horizon. Kalen's mind raced as he realized the walls were closing in. Surrounded, with nowhere left to flee, Kalen's jaw clenched. Miriam's gaze sought his. He knew the moment demanded a choice carved from steel and sacrifice. The scent of imminent peril hung thick, biting into the air. Enemy voices growing nearer, their dark intent unmistakable. Kalen stepped protectively in front of Miriam, eyes steeling. With fierce resolve, tonight the wild would test them beyond all limits. And Kalen had to choose, fight, flee, or surrender the hope they had fought so fiercely to reclaim. As the first footsteps of the patrol cracked against the earth, the wilderness fell silent, waiting, watching, breath held tight in the space between predators and prey. The fire had barely died to embers when the sharp crack of splintering wood rent the night air, dragging Kalen violently back from his weary thoughts. Pain flared across his ribs, a jagged, burning reminder of the skirmish moments before. Yet adrenaline bolstered his limbs as the desperate urgency of their flight pressed hard against the few breaths they had left. Miriam's eyes reflected the flickering moonlight, wide and haunted, as she knelt beside him, her hands trembling, but determined, searching for any sign of deeper wound beneath the shifting stains of blood. She had never tended to broken men, only the fragile scars borne by quiet days in a village to the east. But now, with trembling fingers and a fierce protectiveness she barely recognized as her own, she wrapped torn cloth gently around the gash. "Hold still," she whispered, voice brittle, but filled with unexpected strength. "You need to stop bleeding." Her breath hitched as she pressed the rag more firmly, pushing back the rising dark tide. Kalen's gaze held hers, fierce and weary. The roles had shifted, fragile trust carving its place in the space between them. The grove where they sheltered was narrow, hemmed by towering pines whose needles whispered secrets overhead. The cold bite of the night encroached on their fragile calm, but it was safer than the open plains, where the enemy's hunters searched relentlessly. Kalen leaned against a rough trunk, body slumping, with the weight of his wound, but his eyes never ceased their watchful sweep. Miriam's heart hammered as she tore strips from her own cloak, fashioning makeshift bandages. "You shouldn't have risked yourself like this," she said softly, cheeks burning, not from embarrassment, but from a growing sense of connection she struggled to claim. "I could not leave you behind," Kalen answered quietly. His voice bore the deep timbre of a man unaccustomed to such vulnerability. Yet in this moment, it was raw and honest. Hope is worth risking everything. She stared down at the hands once so foreign, the hands that had saved her, now bloodied and trembling under her care. The fierce lines of his face softened in flickering firelight, revealing the weight of battle and an unspoken burden. Never before had she seen a man so intertwining strength with honor, a warrior torn between code and compassion. A sudden rustle beyond the thicket made them freeze, breaths hitching in identical rhythm. The underbrush stirred as a figure stepped cautiously into the circle of firelight. Taina, Kalen's sister, a poised and alert woman whose sharp gaze cut through the night like a hawk. Her presence was both a balm and a blade. Strength mingled with somber warning in the set of her jaw, and the cool assessment that flickered in her eyes. "Taina," Kalen breathed, shifting slightly to allow her closer. "You came." She nodded, eyes never leaving his wound. "I could not ignore the signs. You are grievously hurt." Her hands moved swiftly, pulling supplies from a leather pack strapped to her back, a pouch filled with herbs, clean cloth, and healing salves. "We tend to your body, but there is a storm within the tribe." Miriam watched as Taina's fingers worked expertly. The quiet ritual of healing, captivating in its precision and care. Yet beneath the surface of her calm was a tension sharp as a knife. "The council is divided," Taina said, voice low but edged with iron. "What you have done, bringing her into the tribe, is more than some of the elders are willing to bear. They see this as a dangerous breach of our ways. Kalen, if you insist on protecting her, you risk exile, and worse, division that could weaken us all." Kalen's gaze hardened, the firelight casting shadows that deepened the lines of his resolve. "I will not abandon her, not after what has happened." "Your heart is brave," Taina replied, "but the path ahead is perilous. Honor must be balanced with the survival of our people." Miriam's breath caught in her throat. The weight of this revelation settled like a stone in her chest. She was no longer just a captive or a rescued soul. She had become a symbol, a catalyst whose presence could fracture or forge the very bonds holding a people together. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and brewing tension. The moan of the night seemed to echo the discord poised on the horizon. Kalen's eyes met Miriam's, unwavering. "We face more than wounds out here," he said. "The tribe's future trembles on a knife's edge, and so does mine." Taina rose, her expression hardening with the weight of unspoken choices. "You have brought us hope, but you have also brought a storm." She hesitated, then added, "We must prepare. The elders will speak soon. You must be ready for what that means." Silence stretched between them, heavy as the darkened forest that surrounded their small band. Miriam swallowed her fear, feeling the stirrings of something fierce and unexpected inside. A will to stand beside this man and the uncertain path he had chosen. The night's quiet was shattered by a distant howl, raw and lingering, a reminder that the wilderness was never truly still. As Taina gathered her healing herbs and preparations, the fragile threads of their alliance wove tighter in the cold shadow of looming crisis. And deep in the forest, beyond their refuge, the murmurs of a divided council grew louder, threatening to break like thunder. The blood on Kalen's side was a harsh testament, but the true wound lay in the fractured loyalty now threatening to tear their world apart. With one last look toward the dark trees, Taina's voice cut through the crisp air, a warning and a challenge in one. The council is split. If you hold fast to your choice, Kaelin, you risk losing everything. The wind seemed to still, and beneath the thick canopy of stars, the future of both Miriam and the tribe hung uncertain, poised on the edge of ancient tradition and a fragile hope for something new. The night stretched around them like a heavy cloak, pressing down with a suffocating weight. Kaelin pressed his hand against the rough arc of a towering pine, the roughness grounding him as he fought the swirling storm inside. His ribs throbbed fiercely, but the pain was nothing compared to the deeper ache, the growing discord within his own tribe. Miriam sat nearby, wrapped in the remnants of a worn blanket, her eyes tracing the flickering shadows thrown by the dying embers of their small fire. She was silent, lips pressed thin, wrestling with 100 unspoken fears. Yet beneath her guarded gaze, something fragile was growing. A fragile hope that had found root beside the scarred warrior who had risked everything to save her. The wilderness around them whispered secrets with the rustling leaves. But the silence between Kaelin and Miriam was heavier still. It was a silence filled with questions neither dared voice. Not yet. Suddenly, the crunch of footsteps on dry earth shattered the calm. Kaelin's gaze snapped toward the movement as Taina emerged from the darkness, carrying a leather satchel filled with healing herbs. Her expression was stern, shadowed with a weight that made Miriam flinch. "Kaelin," Taina said softly, kneeling beside him, "your wound worsens. You must allow me to help." Her hands moved swiftly, applying poultices with practiced care. But her eyes never left his face, watching closely for any sign of refusal. He met her look with a tired nod. There is no other choice. Miriam shifted closer, eyes flickering between the two, sensing the undercurrent of tension. Taina's presence was more than a simple act of sisterly care. It was a reminder of the battle beyond the physical injury. As Taina worked, her voice lowered, heavy with unspoken dread. "The elders grow restless. Your choice to protect her defies the council's will. Many see it as betrayal." She glanced at Miriam cautiously, then back at her brother. "You must decide what matters more, tradition or your heart." Kaelin's jaw clenched. The code he had lived by all his life thrummed in his blood, ancient and unyielding. Yet here, in the quieting night, a new conviction pulled taut against old chains. "Compassion is not weakness," he whispered fiercely. "It is the very strength we need to survive." Miriam's breath caught. She had heard stories of Apache warriors, fierce and unbending. But here was a man, torn between the past he was bound to and the future he yet dared dream. Taina's gaze sharpened. The tribe's unity depends on adherence to the old ways. Your defiance fractures that unity. Be warned, those whispers will grow into storms. Outside their sheltered circle, shadows shifted like restless ghosts. The closeness of danger seeped into the night air, but it was the looming threat within that pounded loudest. Kaelin slid down against the tree, eyes heavy yet unyielding. "I will bear their scorn, if it means protecting her." Miriam reached out, her hand trembling, and lightly brushed his wrist. The contact spoke volumes, a silent pact of trust sewn from threads of pain and hope. "Then we stand together," she murmured. A sudden crack echoed nearby, a dry branch snapping under careful steps. All three tensed as a dark figure emerged from the thickets, the flicker of a torch painting his face in harsh hues. His eyes were hard, unyielding. The emblem on his breast marked him as a messenger from the rival chief, a harbinger of doom. The man's voice cut through the tense air like a jagged blade. "Kalen, your trespass cannot be forgiven. Return the captive, or face the consequences. Our patience ends with the next dawn." Kalen rose slowly, the firelight casting long shadows that danced with his resolve. His gaze did not waver. "Miriam is no prize to be bartered like spoil. She is under our protection." The envoy's sneer deepened. "Then prepare for war. Your choice has sealed your fate, and theirs." He turned away, vanishing as swiftly as he had come, the torchlight swallowed by the dense woods. The threat lingered, a poison in the air that tightened the bonds of mistrust and urgency. Kalen's heart surged with fierce determination. The fragile alliance he had forged now stood on the precipice of collapse. Miriam's eyes searched his, reflecting the storm within. "What happens now?" Kalen's voice was low, steady, but burdened with the weight of impossible choices. "We prepare, for what comes at dawn may dismantle everything we fought to protect." Taina nodded grimly, gathering her herbs. "The elders will speak soon. We are outlaws in our own land now, facing enemies without and within." The night seemed to hold its breath around them, the wilderness pressing in close like a living thing. Ancient codes and fragile bonds, tradition and compassion, all tangled in a web that only the dawn would unravel. They settled back into silence, each lost in their own restless thoughts, knowing that the fragile hope simmering beneath their scars might soon be tested beyond measure. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a warning as cold and sharp as steel. Their sanctuary was a flickering candle against an approaching storm. And as the stars blinked above like watchful eyes, the first faint footsteps of another coming threat echoed through the darkness, a harbinger of a crossing point from survival into battle. The envoy's ultimatum had set the night ablaze, and Kalen knew the dawn would bring no peace. They were cornered, their future suspended on a razor's edge. The fire of the evening had long since returned to glowing embers, but inside the circle of heat, tension crackled, sharper than any flame. The Apache tribe's council fire flickered distantly, its warm glow contrasting with the cold currents swirling through the gathered faces. Tight lines marked brows and lips. Disapproval hung thick in the air like dust in a summer storm. Miriam sat apart, wrapped in a rough-spun shawl that smelled faintly of sage and cedar. Her eyes, once wide with fear, now carried a wariness mingled with determination. Though still an outsider in this harsh new world, she had begun carving a place among these fierce people. Yet tonight, beneath the weight of whispered words and sidelong glances, the fragile alliance she had begun to forge was threatened. Kalen stood before the craggy council elders, his stance steady, but charged with urgency. His voice, steady with raw conviction, carried across the circle. You speak of tradition, of law bound by the blood of our fathers. But what is honor if it leaves the innocent to perish? Miriam is not just a captive or a symbol. She is a life saved, one that could shape the future of our people, if we choose courage over old hatred. His words hung heavy as silence settled like a shroud. Murmurs erupted, the clash of old beliefs and new fears bleeding through the cracks of their ancient code. Taina, Kalen's sister, stepped into the gloom, her dark eyes blazing with fire that reflected both the hearth and a sharper edge alike. "The brother's heart is true," she declared, voice cutting through doubt. "To turn away from her now is to turn away from hope itself. We face enemies without and division within. Our strength lies not merely in the weapons we wield, but in the bonds we forge when all else is shattered." An elder spat onto the ground, voice gruff and unforgiving. "This is a dangerous path, Kalen. To harbor a settler, even one who has shown courage, is to invite ruin. Our enemies will see weakness and strike swiftly." Kalen met the man's icy gaze, unwavering. "I ask you, is it strength to cling blindly to past wounds, or to heal and unite? If we do not evolve, we perish. I will protect Miriam, not because of blood shared, but because life itself is sacred." The tension thickened as more voices rose in opposition, threading through the night like sharpened arrows. Yet amid the storm, a quiet shift occurred. A few younger warriors nodded slowly, their eyes reflecting the possibility of change. Miriam, sensing the fragile balance tipping with every word, rose cautiously. Her voice, though soft at first, grew steadier. "I do not come seeking to unravel your traditions. I only ask for a chance to prove that courage and wisdom can be found where least expected." Her gaze met Kalen's briefly, shared resolve sparking between them. "If you will stand for me, then I will stand for you." A murmur of surprise reverberated through the council. Miriam's words, simple yet charged with raw honesty, chipped away at the hardened walls of suspicion. Some elders shifted uneasily. Others exchanged glances laden with new, hesitant questions. Then the camp's restless quiet shattered sharply. Shouts erupted from the outer edges, and the metallic glint of a hastily seized captive caught every eye. Bound and bleeding, the man was dragged forward, a spy from the rival tribe, eyes wild with panic and defiance. Silence fell like a blade. Kalen's hand dropped to the haft of his knife, muscles coiled like springs ready to snap. The spy's voice trembled as he spat out his message between gasps for breath. "Your deaths are sealed. At dawn, a storm comes, unseen, swift. We strike where your defenses lie weakest. Your choice to harbor the captive is your doom." Every face hardened. Kalen's gaze sharpened, blazing with fire born from the merging of anger and desperate hope. Taina stepped forward, gripping Kalen's arm. "They come at dawn. We have no time to waste. The tribe must rally or fall divided." Miriam's hands clenched the edges of her shawl, heart pounding. The fragile trust they had built now became a fragile lifeline hanging over a precipice. Kalen turned, eyes locking with hers, fierce and unbreakable. We will be ready. Together, the fire crackled, sending sparks up into the vast, dark sky, fleeting stars that vanished like the fragile peace before the storm. Outside the circle, the forest waited. The night held its breath. And at the edge of their sanctuary, the relentless footsteps of an enemy patrol pressed ever closer, closing the gap on their fragile hope. The bond between Kaelin and Miriam deepened with every shared glance and whispered word beneath the heavy sky. The urgency of the looming battle tightened around them like a noose. Yet in this harshness bloomed a rare, fragile unity. Miriam's once guarded eyes now softened, tracing the scarred lines upon Kaelin's face, the silent testament to his sacrifices. And in return, Kaelin found strength he had never known in the steady warmth of her presence. Taina moved purposefully through the camp, gathering the trackers and hunters. Her voice commanded both respect and fierce resolve as she laid out the strategy for the guerrilla warfare ahead. We know this land. They do not. We will use the shadows, the ridges, the winding creeks. Hit them fast, hard, and disappear before they can regroup. Her words ignited a quiet fire among the warriors, weaving confidence into their tense nerves. Miriam watched the preparations with sharp, growing confidence. Despite her origins far from these rugged plains, she was no longer the fragile girl abducted and lost. Already, her sharp mind and quick instincts earned wary nods from the tribe's seasoned fighters. Watching Taina's leadership, she realized survival demanded more than courage. It required unity and trust. The night deepened, embers flickered, and the horizon trembled with the approach of the enemy patrol. Suddenly, shouts shattered the stillness as mounted figures emerged like ghosts from the trees. The attack was swift and merciless. Kaelin was at the forefront, his movements razor-sharp and precise. Years of mastering the warrior's code faltered now against a harsher truth. He battled not just enemies, but shadows of his own beliefs. Each strike struck a fierce balance between honor and necessity. He guarded Miriam as if she were the sacred heart of his tribe, realizing that this union they forged was worth any cost. Miriam, clutching the rawhide shield handed her by Kaelin, felt her pulse sharpen with the adrenaline of battle. Fear twisted inside her, but it was tempered by a fierce resolve. With every enemy that came close, she fought, not like a captive, but as a defender of something greater than survival, a symbol of a bond across worlds. Her breaths came ragged, her muscles screamed, yet her spirit blazed with a newfound fire. Amidst the brutal chaos, Taina led her band of hunters through the shadows, picking off foes with silent arrows and calculated strikes. The terrain itself became their ally. The patrol's disorientation grew palpable as the Apache warriors slipped through the darkness, like whispered winds of death. Kaelin's breath burned in his lungs, the sharp sting in his ribs a cruel reminder of his vulnerability. Yet, the look in Miriam's eyes steadied him, a fearless flame against the encroaching night. Every move he made was a desperate act of protection and revelation, breaking chains of ancient hatred forged long ago. The clash stretched painfully, waves of attack and retreat folding into each other beneath a sky heavy with stars. The ground churned beneath boot and hoof, cries of defiance and pain mingling into a harrowing symphony of survival. Suddenly, a reckless lunge brought Kalen face to face with an enemy warrior. Their blades sang a deadly song, steel scraping steel, sparks leaping like fireflies caught in a storm. Kalen's ribs screamed with each parry, but his will rose beyond the pain. He fought fiercely, not only for his life, but for the fragile hope cradled beside him. A heavy blow caught him squarely in the side, the world momentarily tilting as agony surged through his body. His strength faltered, knees buckling, he staggered back, breath stuttering in a harsh gasp. Around him, the chaos blurred, colors smearing with blood and dust. Miriam's voice tore through the battlefield din, frantic and raw as she reached for him. Kalen, her hands gripped his arm, desperate. "Hold on." Her heart thundered, a drumbeat of fear that matched the war cries all around. Kalen locked his fierce gaze onto hers, one last time, but tether binding them even as darkness crept at the edges of his sight. "I'm not done," he rasped, voice thick. "Protect what we've built. Survive." The words fell heavy like a vow before he crumpled to the earth. Taina's war cry shattered the moment, a rallying roar that sent the warriors surging forward with renewed ferocity, driving the attackers back into the looming shadows of the forest. But within the hard-fought victory hung an unbearable truth. Their leader lay gravely wounded, and the outcome of this fierce night remained uncertain. Miriam knelt beside Kalen, hands shaking as she pressed against his wound, fighting back tears. The warrior who had risked everything to save her was now fragile, caught between life and death beneath the cold stars they had so daringly fought under. Around them, the camp grew tense and silent, eyes full of worry and resolve. The battle had been won, but the war, their survival, was far from secure. And as whispers of dawn teased the horizon, the wilderness fell heavy with the weight of unfinished business, the fragile hope they carried hanging by a thread. Kalen's breath shallowed. The firelight flickered in his fading eyes as he clung to the world, their fate braided tightly with the first crimson light approaching fast. His destiny, uncertain, fragile, yet fiercely alive, awaited the rising sun. Taina moved through the bustling camp, with quiet authority, her eyes sharp and steady as she gathered the scattered warriors and hunters. They looked to her with a mix of respect and hope, their faces etched with exhaustion and tension. She spoke with unwavering resolve. "We will stand united, for Kalen, for Miriam, for the tribe. Old lines will not save us now. Prepare yourselves to fight, not just for tradition, but for survival." Her voice carried through the crisp air, weaving strength into every listening soul. Miriam watched from a distance, wrapped tightly in a rough-spun shawl, her gaze fixed on Taina's commanding figure. It surprised many to see the settler girl standing amidst warriors, learning the ways of the land and earning cautious nods in return. Yet beneath her quiet demeanor burned a spark of determination, a will born from pain, and a fragile hope that refused to be snuffed out. The once fearful captive was becoming a thread connecting two fractured worlds. Kalen remained seated beneath the shelter of an ancient pine, his body marked by the fierce wounds of battle, but his spirit steeled as ever. Tana pressed fresh poultices to his side, her hands steady, yet tender, weaving healing through the pain. His strength lies not just in the body, she murmured to Miriam. It is the spirit that fights on, even when the flesh falters. Miriam's eyes locked with Kalen's, their depths pooling with unspoken gratitude and a growing understanding. "Thank you for protecting me," she whispered, voice trembling with emotion, "even when I doubted you." Kalen's gaze deepened, the warrior within softened by the fragile trust they had forged. "You have given me purpose beyond battle," he said quietly. "Together, we carry something worth more than fear or hatred." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the camp shifted into a tense preparation. Warriors sharpened blades, checked weapons, and murmured plans while the air thickened with the scent of dust and smoke. Miriam moved among them, offering what help she could, repairing a torn strap here, passing water quietly there. Her presence became a balm, steadying nerves frayed by months of conflict. Tana gathered her closest hunters beneath a patch of starlit sky, tracing the lines of their defense strategy. "The enemy does not know this land," she said, voice low but fierce. "We will use every shadow, every ridge to our advantage. Strike swift, vanish like the wind, let them taste fear in the silence." Her words ignited a suppressed fire, confidence born from knowing every twist and turn of the rugged terrain. Miriam listened, absorbing the cadence and determination. She had grown from a frightened girl to a symbol of a fragile unity, her mind sharpening in response to the peril stalking them. Where once the world had seemed a prison, now it held the promise of belonging, if only briefly. Night gave way to darkness, heavier than velvet, muffling the world as an enemy patrol crept from the shadows like ghosts unleashed from nightmare. The first sharp cries shattered the stillness, chaos erupting in a storm of rushing hooves and flying arrows. Kalen surged forward, limbs slicing through the fray with lethal grace born from years of sacred training. Each movement was a delicate balance, honoring the warrior's code, yet bending it to a harsher truth. Protection at any cost. His eyes never left Miriam, the fragile flame whose life had become his own fight to defend. Miriam gripped the rawhide shield Kalen had entrusted to her, heart pounding like a war drum beneath thick flesh. Fear clawed at her ribs, but alongside it blossomed fierce resolve. She was no longer a captive to be hidden away. She was a beacon, standing tall amid the tempest. Every strike she delivered was a vow breathed through sweat and dust, that she would fight for this new, hard-won family. Tana's voice rose above the clash, sharp and commanding, leading her hunters like ghosts stalking prey. Silent arrows whispered death, whispered ambushes fractured the enemy's resolve. The land itself responded, the ridge and creek and thicket bending in service to those who knew its secrets. Kalen's breath hitched, a brutal reminder of the wound burning through his ribs. Pain screamed, but it was drowned beneath the sound of Miriam's steady presence beside him. The look she gave him, a fierce declaration of solidarity, anchored his broken spirit. The battle unfolded in relentless waves. The ground, torn and trampled beneath pounding feet. Voices of defiance, cries of pain, the wild symphony of survival surrounded them. Steel sang its deadly song as Kalen locked blades with an enemy warrior. The world narrowing to the clash of weapons and the roar of his own blood pounding in ears. A strike, brutal and unyielding, slammed into Kalen's side. His body lurched, breath ragged, the world spinning in a haze of pain and shadow. His knees buckled. The ground rose up to meet him like an old enemy. "Miriam!" His voice was a fractured plea through clenched teeth. She reached for him as the battlefield blurred at the edges of his vision. "Hold on, Kalen!" she gasped, hands trembling yet sure as she pressed against his side, trying to stem the flood of life slipping away. His gaze met hers one last time, fiery, unbroken, a tether binding them beyond this moment. "I'm not done," he rasped. "Protect what we've built. Survive." Then he fell. Taina's fierce cry shattered the moment, rallying the warriors into a renewed surge. They pushed the attackers back, driving them into the shadows that swallowed the forest. Yet beneath the raw victory hung a dreadful truth. Their leader lay broken, caught between life and death beneath the cold stars. Miriam knelt beside him, tears blurring the firelight as she clutched his bloodied hand. The man who had risked everything to save her now seemed so fragile, his breath shallow, his strength fading. Around them, the camp stood silent, the weight of uncertain fate pressing down like a storm cloud. The battle was won. The war, their survival, had only just begun. And as pale light crept over the horizon, Kalen's breath shuddered in fragile rhythm beneath the unforgiving dawn. His fate, uncertain yet fiercely alive, hung suspended on the razor's edge of a coming storm. The dawn's heavy breath still clung to the air when Kalen squared his shoulders and stepped into the clearing where the tribe's council had gathered. Their faces, carved by years of harsh winds and harsher traditions, were etched with suspicion and resolve. Each elder's narrow eyes bore into him as if weighing the very essence of his soul. Before them, Miriam sat, quietly, wrapped in a rough shawl, her gaze steady despite the currents of tension rippling through the camp. Kalen's voice broke the thick silence. "You speak of tradition and honor, but what honor is there in abandoning the innocent to perish? Miriam is not just a settler. She is a life saved. And in saving her, we save a part of ourselves." His words hung in the charged air, heavy as the smoke from the council fires, stirring a restless murmur among the elders. Whispers ignited into low arguments, voices clashing like stones against the rocky floor beneath them. An elder, weathered and grave, spat out, "To harbor a captive, one of the enemy, is to invite ruin. Our enemies wait for weakness." His words cut sharp, yet Kalen met his gaze unflinching, the fierce calm of a warrior forged by battle. "Strength," Kalen answered, voice unwavering, "lies not simply in wielding weapons or guarding old wounds. It is in choosing compassion when it is needed most. If we cling to hatred, we will perish. I stand for her because life is sacred beyond any bloodline." A deep silence settled, fractured only by a few hesitant nods from younger warriors whose eyes reflected the flicker of hope beneath the doubt. Miriam rose slowly then, her voice soft but carrying. the courage of one who had crossed unknown thresholds. I do not seek to unravel your ways. I ask only for a chance to prove that courage and wisdom can be found where none expect it. Her gaze met Kaelin's, an unspoken bond sparking between them. If you stand with me, I will stand with you. The council shifted uneasily, caught between old fears and the fragile possibility of change. Before more could be spoken, a harsh cry shattered the fragile peace. At the camp's edge, a captive was dragged forward, bloodied, wild-eyed, a spy from the rival tribe. Their arrival sent a sharp blade of tension, slicing through the clearing. Kaelin's hand dropped instinctively to his knife as the spy gasped out a dire warning. Your deaths are sealed. At dawn, we strike where your defenses are weakest. This mercy you show cuts your throat. The words fell like thunder. Taina stepped forward, gripping Kaelin's arm, her eyes blazing with a fierce command. At dawn they come. We have little time. The tribe must unite or fall divided. Miriam's fingers tightened on her shawl's edge, heart pounding like the relentless drumbeats of war. She was no longer the captive, but a symbol caught between two worlds, fragile yet unyielding. Kaelin's eyes locked onto hers, fierce and unbreakable. We will be ready, together. As the fire crackled and sent sparks skyward, the forest beyond held its breath. The enemy's footsteps edged ever closer, closing the gap where fragile hope still flickered. Night cloaked the valley in velvet darkness, but within the camp, preparations surged like a rising tide. Taina moved through the restless warriors with unyielding purpose, voices lowered, but fierce. We know these lands. They do not. We will strike swiftly. From shadowed ridges and vanish like wind through the brush, they will taste fear before dawn. Miriam watched, her heart a tempest of nervous determination. Though once a frightened girl ripped from her village, she now bore the spark of belonging, her mind quick, her courage sharpened by survival. Her hands moved quietly amidst the bustle, repairing gear, passing water, a steady presence calming frayed nerves. Kaelin sat beneath a towering pine, ribs still burning, but his spirit molten with resolve. Taina pressed healing salves with practiced care, her voice low. His strength is not in flesh, but spirit, that which pushes beyond pain. Their eyes met briefly, silent acknowledgement of the hardships borne and battles yet to come. Suddenly, the night shattered. From the shadows, enemy riders surged forth, hooves pounding thunder through the stillness. Arrows hissed, voices roared as chaos erupted. Kaelin leapt into the fray. Every movement honed by years of sacred discipline, tempered now by the brutal truth of protecting what mattered beyond codes and blood. His gaze never wavered from Miriam, the fragile flame he fought to defend. Miriam gripped the rawhide shield Kaelin had entrusted her, heart racing in time with the lightning-quick beat of danger. Fear curled within her ribs, but was drowned beneath fierce resolve. She fought, not as prey, but as guardian of a fragile hope, stretched taut between their worlds. Taina's war cry rang out, sharp and commanding, as hunters moved like shadows, silent arrows puncturing the night. The land itself seemed to rise with them, each ridge and creek become an ally in their desperate dance of survival. Kalen's breath came ragged, ribs screaming their protest with every strike. Yet Miriam's steadfast presence beside him steadied the storm inside. Her fierce gaze was an anchor amid the chaos, a blaze against encroaching dark. The battle roiled in relentless waves. Voices snarled. Steel sang its deadly song beneath the permanent gaze of stars that had witnessed centuries of blood and hope. Suddenly, the fierce blow landed, brutal, unyielding, slamming into Kalen's side. His world pitched violently, breath stuttering as knees buckled. The ground rushed up, cruel and indifferent. "Miriam!" His voice cracked, raw with pain and desperation. She reached for him, hands trembling, yet resolute. "Hold on," she urged, pressing a trembling palm against the torn flesh, a fragile lifeline against the fading light. His gaze clasped hers, fierce and unbroken, even as darkness crept close. "I'm not done. Protect what we've built. Survive." The words whispered like a vow before he collapsed. Taina's cry shattered the night, the rallying roar pulling their warriors into a final surge, forcing the enemy back into the swallowing shadows of the forest. Yet victory bore a bitter weight. Their leader lay broken, life balanced precariously between breath and silence beneath the unforgiving sky. Miriam knelt by his side, tears blurring the firelight as she gripped his hand. He who had risked all was now fragile, caught at the edge of night and dawn. Around them, the camp held breath, the future hanging by the thinnest thread. Kalen's ragged breaths whispered beneath the growing light, their fate suspended on the razor's edge of what dawn might bring. The dawn broke slowly over the valley, spilling pale light across the weathered faces gathered in the council clearing. The elders sat stiff and resolute, the weight of history pressing into every furrow of their brows. Kalen stood before them, his ribs still aching from last night's brutal fight, but his voice rang clear and unwavering. "You speak of tradition and honor," he said, eyes sweeping the circle. "But what honor is there in abandoning the innocent to die? Miriam is not only a settler lost to us, she is a life saved. In protecting her, we choose life for all of us." A murmur rose, low and uncertain, cracking the silence like the first tremor before a storm. The oldest elder spat onto the earth, voice hard and unforgiving. "To harbor an enemy's captive is to invite ruin. Our foes will strike where we are weakest." Kalen met his gaze without flinching. Strength lies not in clinging to old wounds, but in compassion when it is needed most. Hatred will doom us all. I stand for her because every life is sacred beyond bloodlines. Some younger warriors exchanged uncertain looks, the firelight catching hope in their eyes where doubt once lived. Miriam rose quietly. Her voice, soft but steady, carried the courage born of having crossed worlds far apart. "I do not come to unravel your ways. I ask only for a chance to prove that courage and wisdom can be found in the least expected places." She met Kalen's gaze, their shared resolve sparking between them. "If you stand for me, I will stand for you." The murmurs softened to silence again, a fragile truce weaving through a gathering storm of old fears. Suddenly, sharp cries shattered the calm. From the edge of camp, captured and bloodied, a spy was dragged forward. His wild eyes burned with desperation and defiance. The men fell silent, all eyes fixed on the captive. The spy gasped out a warning, voice ragged but fierce. "Your deaths are sealed. At dawn, we come swift and unseen where your defenses break. This mercy you grant seals your fate." Kalen's hand dropped to the haft of his knife, muscles taut. Tina stepped forward, gripping his arm fiercely, eyes blazing fire. At dawn, they strike. We have no time left. The tribe must unite or fall divided. Miriam's fingers clenched the edges of her shawl, heart pounding like war drums. She was no longer a captive, but a symbol, fragile yet unyielding, caught between two worlds. Kalen's gaze locked with hers, fierce and unbreakable. "We will be ready, together." The fire crackled, sparks rising and fading into the dark expanse. The forest held its breath. The enemy's steps edged closer, swallowing the fragile hope that still flickered. Night deepened as Tina moved through the camp, commanding the warriors with iron will. "We know this land. They do not. We strike swift from the ridges and vanish like wind. They will taste fear before dawn." Miriam watched, uncertainty folding into fierce determination. She was no longer a frightened girl lost to fate, but a thread binding fractured worlds. Her hands worked quietly, repairing straps, passing water, as her spirit anchored the camp's frayed nerves. Beneath a silent sky, Kalen sat by a towering pine, ribs still throbbing with pain, but spirit molten with resolve. Tina pressed her salves to the wound, voice low and steady. "His strength lies not in flesh, but spirit, the fire that pushes beyond pain." Their eyes met, silent acknowledgement of what had been lost and what remained to fight for. Then the night shattered. From the shadows, enemy riders thundered like a storm unleashed. Arrows hissed, voices roared, chaos erupted. Kalen surged into the fray, every movement honed by sacred discipline, tempered by the brutal need to protect all that mattered beyond blood and code. His gaze never left Miriam, the fragile flame he fought to defend. Miriam gripped the rawhide shield Kalen had given her, heart pounding like a war drum. Fear clawed within her, but fierce resolve blazed hotter. No longer prey, she was a guardian of fragile hope forged between worlds. Tina's war cry cut through the battle, as hunters slipped like shadows, arrows piercing dark, terrain itself twisting to their advantage. Kalen's breaths came ragged, ribs screaming with every strike, but Miriam's steady presence grounded him. Her fierce eyes held his broken spirit firm. The struggle unfolded in relentless waves. Steel sang, cries rose, all under watchful stars who'd seen centuries of blood and hope. Suddenly, a blow, brutal, true, slammed into Kalen's side. The world tilted violently, breath hitched, knees buckling. The ground rushed to meet him, hard and indifferent. "Miriam," his voice broke, raw with pain and desperation. She reached for him, hands trembling but sure as she pressed against the wound, holding him to life. "Hold on," she urged fiercely, a lifeline against fading light. His gaze locked hers one last time, fiery, unbroken, even as darkness crept near. I'm not done. Protect what we've built. Survive. His words whispered a vow before he collapsed. Taina's cry pierced the night, a rallying roar pulling warriors forward, driving the enemy into shadows of the forest. Victory bore a bitter weight. Their leader lay broken, caught between night and dawn, beneath the unforgiving sky. Miriam knelt by his side, tears blurring firelight as she gripped his bloodied hand. The man who risked everything was fragile now, balanced on the edge between life and death. Around them, the camp waited, breath held tight, the future tethered to the thinnest thread. Kalen's shallow breaths whispered, beneath the growing dawn, their fate suspended on a razor's edge. But hope endured. As first light kissed the valley, the tribe's elders stepped forward, their faces softened by the trials they'd witnessed. Murmurs turned to nods, hardened hearts opening to the fragile new path forged through courage and compassion. Miriam stood beside Kalen, now supported but alive, both symbols of a future no longer bound by old hatred. The village and the tribe, once divided by fear, began to weave together a new story. A home born not from blood alone, but from trust, sacrifice, and the hope that peace could rise where violence had once reigned. The valley breathed in that morning, heavy with loss, but rich with promise. And beneath the vast sky of the Old West, they stood together, warriors, survivors, and family, ready to build a new dawn from the ashes of the past.